Okay guys, so I'm up at this shelter site location and I'm going to go through kind of selecting a shelter site and how I like to set up my shelter and kind of my preferred setup. And so, I always try to, all my training and everything, I try to kind of split the difference between full tactical and say bushcraft and survival and hunting. I think there's kind of an area in between there, and that's where I like to kind of center my goals and what I do. And so, all the stuff that I'm going to teach you will apply to any one of those situations, and you can simply modify and adjust. If you're in more of a tactical situation, of course, take more of the tactical considerations into effect. And so real quick, I've got my deck of Team Leader Fieldcraft Knowledge cards. And these are cards it's a product that I make. They're laser engraved metal cards with, 30 pages, so to speak, of useful knowledge that I've found useful both as an infantry team leader and squad leader, as a fieldcraft instructor and a bushcraft and survival student. All different things that I've felt were useful. And so some of the topics on these cards are shelter. And so the first thing I want to go over real quick is shelter site selection. And this is called the 5 W's. I learned this from Dave Canterbury out at the Pathfinder School. And so the first W is wind and weather. And these are all the factors that we want to consider when we're picking an area to set up a shelter, okay? So we want to consider the wind and the weather. So which way is the wind blowing from, or which way do we expect it to blow from? And what's the weather? So right now other than the wind, it's beautiful, sunny, clear, but we've had a lot of late evening thunderstorms and what was that? I thought I heard an animal. So anyways, we've had a lot of late evening, afternoon thunderstorms, rain showers, and so I want to have some sort of overhead cover. And in the summertime we can get hail, and so I like something like trees to help protect from that. But of course I'm going to set up my poncho, or my tarp rather, to also give me a wind and rain cover. Next, our water. We want to be near a source of water. So right now we're about a half a mile from a pond that I can go down and get water. Plus over in these hills, kind of on the backside of these trees, I know there's some natural seeps as well. Wood, we should be near a source of wood and other resources. So wood, obviously, we've got some trees here. I got some kind of standing dead juniper trees here, which brings us to our next thing, is widowmakers. So we do want to look out for widowmakers. I think these trees are going to be all right. They're pretty sturdy, pretty solid. If you were in like a deciduous type forest, you definitely want to look for those really tall trees, or the big treetops that have broken off and are just kind of hanging in the trees. And last is wigglies. We want to check for bugs, reptiles, animal trails, etc. And that means basically in the area that we're actually going to set up our shelter. And so I'm going to be setting it up kind of right in this area right. So going back to my cards real quick, let's talk about some other shelter site considerations. This might be in more of a non-permissive environment where you want to start thinking about this stuff. So next is our keyword BLISS, and these are low profile shelter factors. So for B, we want to blend in with the terrain and the vegetation. And so this site is awesome at that. You can see we're probably 3-4 feet down in a hole all the way around us. So we are basically below the surface of the normal terrain out here, okay? And of course with vegetation, we've got good overhead cover as well as ground cover. Next, we want a low silhouette. We don't want our shelter to be any higher than knee height, okay? Now I'll do mine a little higher than that so it's a little more comfortable, but if I was in a tactical environment, I would do it lower than knee height if I put one up at all, okay? The eye is irregular shape. So we want to break up any straight lines. You know, I use a rectangular tarp. That's a pretty identifiable line, you know, when you get that ridge line up. And so what I'll do is I'll take vegetation and just drape it over that ridge line to start breaking up that outline. Next is going to be size. You know, we don't want it any bigger than necessary. So we're not building the tarp mahal out here. We just want enough to cover us and our gear and keep us out of the weather so we don't get hypothermia mainly. And so I use 5x8 rectangular sil nylon tarps, and they work great. And you know, another reason you want to keep it as small as possible is that when you're tucking into a concealed location like this, you know, you don't have all the room in the world to be spreading out a tarp and guying it out, especially if you're working with a team of guys and other people need room for their shelters. So, you know, keep it nice and small. The next S is secluded location. We want to be away from people and in tough terrain. And I feel like this does a pretty good job of that. There's no roads nearby. I had to hike to get up here. It's secluded. There's no reason why anybody would come up here. So going to our next card from the deck that kind of I feel we can also, some factors to be thinking about is our patrol base and hide site selection criteria. And we use the keyword coolant for that. So some of these factors are going to overlap, but we want cover and concealment. And so cover is anything that'll stop bullets. Concealment is anything that hides us from vision, you know, whether that be normal daytime vision, night vision, thermal vision, you know, whatever you're trying to hide from, that's concealment. But cover is what actually stops bullets. And so here we actually have good cover. You know, we're in a hole, like I said, 3 to 4 feet down, and we have pretty good concealment. Of course, we could improve on both of those a lot and make this into a very defendable location. All right, next we want to be off lines of drift. And so a line of drift is the routes that people normally would take, okay? If they're trying to get from point A to point B, we don't want to be in between point A and point B. We want to be off at point E. You know, we want to be way out of the way in an area that's full of nasty, tangly, thorny crap, you know, old fences that are down. I mean, it's just kind of, who would walk through this stuff, you know? Nobody would walk through here. They'd go over there, right? Where it's nice and smooth and easy. All right. Next, the other O, we want to be out of sight, sound, and small arms range of our objective, okay? So we're trying to stay hidden, we're trying to stay concealed, and we want to be, like it says, out of sight, sound, and small arms range, okay? Next, zoom in here. It needs to be large enough for our group, for our patrol, okay? If it's too small, that's no good. And so a site like this be pretty good for probably up to 6 guys, maybe a few more, depending on how you do it. It needs to afford a basic defense. Once again, you know, we're kind of in a depression here. We can shoot out pretty good. We have pretty good fields of fire for the most part. So it could afford a basic defense, you know, long enough for us to get the hell out. Near water, once again, we're near water, and it's in tough terrain. You know, we're actually on a hillside. So people would have to walk uphill hundreds of yards to do that, to even get close to us, which, you know, I don't know if you've seen the state of most Americans lately, but I doubt they're even going to be able to walk up this far, let alone over rough terrain, through thorn bushes, and so on, you know. And one nice thing about tough terrain is it's hard to move through without making noise. So if anybody's trying to sneak up on you, hopefully you can hear them, you know. So those were our cards for shelter site kind of selection and consideration, both in, you know, a tactical environment or just in a normal environment. Okay guys, so real quick before I get to it, I'm just going to quickly detail what I'm going to be doing. And so I'm going to be stringing up a rapid deploy 550 cord ridgeline from this dead tree over to this tree. And then I'm going to be setting up my tarp as a lean-to and putting my back. The wind's coming from this direction, so I'm gonna be setting the tarp up so that the back of my tarp is facing that way, and it'll be opening up this way. So another thing to consider when we're setting up our shelter is, you know, if we have the ridgeline going from this tree straight across to this tree, I'm going to be laying in this area right here, right in front of me. And what we have down here, we want to start looking for, before we get the shelter set up, we want to look for things, obstructions on the ground that we're not going to want to lay on. And so this large stick, get rid of him. Then right here, we've got a bunch of small plants. And this one in particular is a wild rose, which has small little stickers. You know, it's not enough to like really hurt you, but they can be really annoying. And so that's one of the reasons, you know, people have questioned like, oh, why do you carry a shovel? And being able to modify the ground to suit our needs is a really important field skill that I think gets overlooked by a lot of people. And so what I can do with that shovel is I can go through and quickly remove all these plants. If I had to dig up a rock for some reason, I could. You know, that shovel, while it's not a full-blown hatchet, if I had to remove some branches quickly, sticks, things like that, I absolutely could do that in a heartbeat with that shovel. So I'm going to go ahead and get busy doing that, clearing out a spot, because I'm going to set up as if I'm going to stay out here tonight. So the shovel that I use, that I prefer to carry, is the sapper spade, the Russian sapper spade, and this one's a titanium one, so it's super lightweight. You know, I've modified the handle a little bit, kind of give me a little better grip, but it's a great tool. On one edge, I do basically what I just call a lawnmower blade edge, just bevel the edge so it cuts a little easier, but I'm not trying to make anything shaving sharp or anything. But it works awesome at basically delimbing trees and logs and stuff really fast. You can also debark really easy with it. So I'm just going to use it right now and just start coming in and removing all these little thorny rose bushes. All right. And what's great about this is if I didn't have this shovel, what tool would I use to do this? Either my knife or a hatchet. You know, I have used my folding saw as well, but if I use my folding saw, I kind of got to hold the plant and cut it, and I don't really want to hold on to this thorny plant any more than I have to, so I just aim for the base and just chop it off. So I'm just going to go through and complete that, getting rid of all these little sticker bushes and any other obstructions that I find. Really big rose root right there. There we go. You know, anything like those things are just going to stab you and make you bleed to death. But, you know, when you're crawling in and out of your shelter and getting them little, they're like fine slivers. And they just they irritate your skin, and they're kind of after a couple days, you know, your hands are already getting pretty raw out here in the field. So you don't really want to be doing any more damage to them or anything like that than you have to. You guys might notice that I pretty much wear gloves majority of the time that I'm out here. It's because these are your money makers. All right. All your work that you're going to be doing is with your hands, whether it's cutting up game, shooting, using a compass, building a shelter, whatever you're doing it with your hands. So you've got to protect your hands. All right. If I slip out here and hurt myself doing something dumb, well, now I've just lost my primary means of taking care of myself. Okay, guys, so let's talk about the tools that I'm going to be using to make this shelter. And so over here I've got my standard, what I would consider my shelter kit. First is my USGI poncho. Okay, this is probably the most multifunctional piece of gear you can carry in the field. Mine goes with me every time I go out, even when there's no clouds in the sky, this thing's coming with. You know, obviously we can use it as a rain poncho in a rainstorm. It also doubles as a tarp for shelter use. It can be used as a litter to carry somebody if they're injured. Okay, we can use it to collect rainwater. It has so many uses. It's a piece of gear that I absolutely will not go without. And out of all the gear that I've tested and upgraded over the years, this is the one piece that I've never been able to find an upgrade to. And it just stays in my gear all the time. Next is my tarp. So this is my 5x8 sil nylon tarp made by Bushcraft Outfitters. You know, I'm not affiliated with pretty much any company. Nobody sponsors me or anything like that. These guys, I think, went out of business this year. And so sadly, this tarp's not made anymore, but it's just a 5x8 sil nylon tarp. And you know, sil nylon's amazing because it's fairly tough, but it's also very, very lightweight. And what I love about it is that it compresses down into, you know, you can take this tarp and just continue to compress it into, you know, the size of a baseball. And it literally just fits anywhere you want to put it. I mean, I could put it in a cargo pocket if I really wanted. And so what I love about that is that my shelter is very non-bulky in my pack, which means I can carry a smaller pack, you know. And the lightweight, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know this is well under a half a pound. I'm thinking 6 ounces for some reason. And then lastly, my stake and ridgeline kit. And this just is in a drawstring bag that came with my Climate Static V pad, which I don't have with me today. But I like to use this bag because it works well. And it actually has a sewn-in storage pouch for the repair kit for that Static V pad. So I just keep it with my shelter gear because I will use that pad when it gets colder. You know, one thing I want to make sure to get clear is what I'm showing you today is a great, you know, warmer weather setup. And so some of the stuff you're going to see today is more towards summertime. And if it were winter, I would bring maybe heavier duty items. And so here's my 30-foot 550 cord quick deploy ridgeline with 4 Prusik loops on it. And I do 4 instead of 2 for a certain reason, and I'll show you that later. Then I have 4 of the heavy duty Pathfinder titanium stakes. And these are awesome stakes, but I don't know if they're going to be selling them anymore. I think I saw the other day on their website that they're getting rid of them, sadly. These were awesome stakes, but I just need 4 stakes. I'm not going to carry a bunch with me because I don't want to, this is all I need to quickly get a shelter up. And ideally, you should be able to get some form of shelter up within 5 minutes. You know, you see a storm rolling in or something, you should be able to quickly see a spot and get a shelter up so you're at least out of the wind and the rain in 5 minutes. Is it going to be the perfect shelter? Probably not, but you should be able to quickly get your ridgeline up, get a tarp staked out, and get out of the weather, you know, for at least a short-term shelter. So I got those 4 stakes. I also carry a handful of these small commando lines. They're, you know, typically about 3 feet long. They just have an end of the line loop on one end and a over the hand knot on the other. These come in handy for a lot of different, you know, if I need to extend my ridge line, I can do that. If I need to guy out a corner or something, I can do that. So they're just handy to have around. And I've got a few of those in this bag. So those are the shelter components that I bring with me. Very lightweight, very multifunctional, some of them. But there's also tools that we can make in the field quickly and easily. You know, I mean, this is a great mallet. We can drive our stakes in easily with that. I don't have to carry something special to drive stakes with. I can make one. Speaking of stakes, all this stuff is stakes and mallet and everything came from a shelter that I had used out here before, and I just stashed this stuff out here, so if I need it again, I've already got it. So I've got 3 leftover stakes. You know, there's just a point on one end, a 7-notch, and I crown the end, and they work really good. So I can make more stakes if I need them. Of course, toggles are a great tool. We use those for all sorts of things with our shelters and other gear. Then another tool, especially important for me out here where I live, is just being able to make a bipod. And of course you could shoot off something like this, or we could make a tripod for that. But where this really shines is in a situation where I don't have two trees and a nice piece of ground to lay in between them. You know, maybe I need to just come off of one tree and come straight out and guy to this bipod. And honestly, I use that type of shelter setup, and I'll probably do a separate video on that many times. Okay. So these are just some tools that we can improvise in the field. They're very useful. You know, this 550 cord lash, I just used one of those 3-foot commando lines like I talked about. And so having the ability to make some extra tools means I don't have to bring stuff with me all the time. And if I find a good shelter site that I might use more often, I'll leave the tools there. You know, this was just hanging in a tree left by me probably over a year ago. So, okay guys, so the first thing I need to do is get my ridgeline up. And so if you remember, we're gonna come from this tree, we're gonna go across to those trees, okay? And so if you're not familiar with the quick deploy ridgeline system, I don't know exactly where it came from, but I learned it at the Pathfinder school quite a few years ago, and here it is. And it's basically, if you hank up your 550 cord a certain way, you can quickly deploy it without having to do a bunch of untangling, okay? And so at this end, I've got an end of the line loop and 4 prussics. And what I want to do is I want to slide these prussics back about 3 feet, okay? And so I'm going to take this loop, and then I'm going to take a toggle, which is just a stick about the diameter of my index finger. And I'm not trying to set my any 5-minute shelter records here. I'm trying to teach you guys, so it's going to be nice and slow. Take about the first 3 feet of this ridge line with the loop on the end. I'm going to run it around a tree, and then I'm going to take, and through the loop, I'm going to pull the main part of the line, and then I'm going to drop a toggle through that loop. All right. Like I said, I take the loop, pull the line through it. I'm going to drop that toggle in and capture it. All right, and it gets stuck. All right, and that's a marline spike knot is what that ends up making. And I'm setting mine about roughly waist high, okay? And next I'm just going to grab hold of my hanked up cordage, and since it's been hanked up in the right manner, all I got to do is pull, and that cordage just disperses right out of there. Okay, so I've got my ridge line all the way out. I'm just going to go around the other side, the other tree that I want to use for support. I'm going to pull that nice and tight, and I'm going to get about a foot or so away from the tree. I'm going to put a trucker's hitch in. I'm going to run this running end of my cordage through that. That's going to work as a pulley so I can tighten my ridge line. I'm going to get that as tight as I can. I'm going to pinch it. Run that trucker's hitch over. Oh, get my finger out of there. Now, real quick, guys, before I get to put my tarp up and stuff, I just need to make a few more toggles so that I can hook it up the way I want to here in a minute. So all I've done is I've cut, about a 3-4 inch stick, about the diameter of my pinky, and I'm just going through and crowning the end so it doesn't dig into my tarp or wear any holes in the wind, removing any rough spots. Okay, now when we're doing this, we don't want to be out here just whacking away on this with our knife. Okay, what you want to do is called the chest lever technique. Okay, basically we're going to take the knife and we have it in reverse grip like this with the blade pointed back, and we're going to plant that pommel of our knife just in our chest at a comfortable height. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to take the wood that we're working with and we're going to drag it across the knife. And you'll notice that my knife, other than moving a little as I pull against it, I'm not really putting any energy behind the blade. Okay, I'm not forcing the knife through anything. I'm just bringing the wood up to the knife and dragging it across the blade, okay? And what that is, that's a much safer technique than, most people would do when they're out here whittling. For one, I'm holding on to a little piece of wood. It's only, it's barely long enough for me to hold on to, let alone for me to get a blade in. If I were to come back too far and then push, I could cut my finger, of course. And when you're in the tight confines here with a group of people, potentially, we don't need people out here slinging their knife around, hitting people. Any of you that were in Boy Scouts, I'm sure you'll remember your blood circle. It's that concept. We don't want anybody within contact distance of our knife. Well, if we can keep that knife from swinging around, instead bring it back here and do all the work like this, it's very controlled, okay, and very safe. That's what you need when you're out here and everybody's hot, tired, or cold and hungry, whatever the case may be. You need people to, I don't want to say dumb things down. That's the wrong way to look at it. I'm not trying to insult people's intelligence, but we need to make them simpler than they seem like they need to be. When we're well fed and rested and everything, oh, this is silly. Why don't I carve like this all the time? Okay, maybe you do. But do you come out here and do it all the time when you're hot and tired and cold and hungry? No. And so you got to simplify things down, okay? That way it kind of removes that room for error, okay? Okay, guys, so somehow I lost the audio portion of this next segment. And so I'm going to go ahead and just, in this part, I'm just setting up my tarp in a normal kind of lean-to configuration. I like the lean-to of your kind of three basic tarp setups, the lean-to, the A-frame, and the plow point. With a rectangular tarp, I like the lean-to the best because it's easiest to get in and out of, and it gives adequate coverage unless you're in very inclement weather. And, a better, of the three setups, a better option for inclement weather would be the A-frame, but it sucks getting in and out of. Like, I absolutely hate it for that. At least with this smaller 5x8 tarp, it's like crawling into a culvert or something. And so here I'm just kind of setting up the lean-to, which is what I prefer. Like I said, kind of as a fair weather shelter. And it's great because you can set up a fire, 3-4 feet in front of it, and it'll work to reflect some of that heat back down onto you. And in the heat, it's great because you get great ventilation. And I personally don't really like sleeping in tents. I like laying under something like a lean-to because in the middle of the night, I wake up, to do my business, and it's easy to get in and out of. And it's great being able to lay there and, watch the stars and everything as you fall back asleep. So I really enjoy sleeping under a tarp. And so what I'll do, for those who aren't kind of familiar with either the quick deploy ridgeline or the tarp setups, I will go ahead and link videos in the description. Better videos than mine that go into more detail if you're not familiar with those. And so at this point in the video, I've staked down the bottom corners of the tarp. And this particular design of tarp has two, it has corner guy outs as well as two in the center there on the long side. And that's why I use 4 prusik loops, is because I like to be able to toggle those 2 center points as well to help support the tarp better. But when we convert this shelter over to an inclement weather shelter, which I'll detail soon, those 2 toggles at the top become important. So right now what I'm talking about is, I've kind of got the tarp temporarily staked out on the bottom, and I've got it toggled at the top. And what I want to do is start looking to make sure the angles and everything look right. And so here I've got a couple more stakes. And like I said, there's 2 tie outs in the center of the tarp. I'm gonna go ahead and tie those down, or stake those down rather, and then I'll be able to kind of do a final inspection of the tarp and make any final adjustments. So I've got the bottom staked out, and I can tell that this left corner, I didn't quite stake it out far enough, so I'm just going to pop that stake out and pull it out a little bit further to kind of give that tarp a little more rigidity. So here's kind of the final product, so to speak. I've got 4 stakes in the back, 4 toggles across the top, and even in the breezy day that we had there, it's fairly rigid. And so you can see it gives a good amount of coverage, enough for one person and their gear. And that's really all you need. It still has good, easy entry and exit, and also great ventilation in the heat. But like I said, in inclement weather, you get wind and rain, it can blow under there a lot easier. And so in the next segment, we're going to go over how to convert this over for inclement weather. Okay guys, so we've got our shelter set up. Now let's talk about setting up the rest of our site. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we police up any extra stakes, toggles, etc. I've got them organized so they're not a trip hazard. I'm not falling on them. And I want to gather up any loose shelter items that I'm not using right now, like this drawstring bag for my tarp. And I want to make sure I store it somewhere secure so I don't lose it. All right, so let's talk about what we're looking for with a shelter. First, we need 3 things. We need something to sleep under. This is going to protect us from the weather. We need something to sleep on, like this foam pad, that's going to insulate us from the ground so our body heat isn't getting conducted away. And then lastly, we need something to sleep in, which is some form of insulation to help keep us warm. Okay, so we've already got the tarp up, so that's something to sleep under. Now it's time to sleep on something. And this is my 3/4 length foam pad. It's just a GI folding or a foam pad that I've modified. You know, I cut it down so it's only about as wide as I am, and it's only about 3/4 long as I am tall. So it goes from pretty much from my head down to my knees roughly. And then what I did was I cut it into 4ths and then retaped those pieces with about a 1/4 inch gap in between them that works like a hinge. So I can fold this into a lot of different configurations. You know, I can sit on it, I can kneel on it, and of course I can sleep on it. And so once again, multifunctional piece of gear. All right. And it has a pretty good R value. You know, like I said, this is my summer setup. If it was getting colder, I would still bring this with, because what this also does is acts as a protective barrier against any sharp objects for when I'm using any inflatable pads on top of it. So let's talk about that insulation layer. Now it's summertime, it's warm. I don't need a lot, but if you think about worst case scenario, it can still get down in the 50s. It can still be raining for multiple days. There may come a time where I need to get inside something and get warm, especially at night. You know, worst case scenario, we could be out here 20-mile-an-hour winds and it could be raining in 15 degrees or 50 degrees. And you know, that's good hypothermia weather. And so what I like is the Helicon Tex Swagman roll. I think it's a great piece of gear, right up there with my USGI poncho, honestly. It works great. You can wear it, but it also works great as a small sleeping bag. And once I find the zipper, we can turn it into one. Okay. So here it is in sleeping bag form. I think we all understand how a sleeping bag works. Now, I'm actually personally not a big fan of sleeping bags. And so what I'll do, I'm much more of a top quilt kind of guy. So I'll unzip this down about that far, and I'll put the zipper to the bottom and use it like a top quilt instead. Because I'm not a huge guy, but my shoulders are wide enough that when this thing's zipped up all the way, I feel a little cooped up. So having that top open like that works really good for me. Another piece of gear that I think is It's not critical, but this is probably my one item that I would say is comfort, although I think it's arguable that getting a good night's rest is very important. And if you're only getting a few hours of sleep, you want them to be the best they can be. And this is a small inflatable pillow made by Alps Mountaineering. And I've used this pillow for the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years in lots of classes. And I've had great luck with it. You know, I've actually slept with nothing more than my Swagman and this on bare concrete at a class, and not one of mine. I was a student at one. And I can tell you, this right here makes an uncomfortable sleeping site very, very comfortable. So that'll just hang out up there. And then I'll take this bag. Yeah, right. And I'll take this bag and I'll put it in my shelter kit bag so I don't lose it. And lastly, because it's summertime, the next piece of gear that I like to bring is mosquito netting. This is just a cheap mosquito net I got offline, and I like it because it clips up to my ridgeline. Then I can take it and get it guyed out, or I can just drape it over me most of the time. It doesn't really have to be anything real crazy. Just drape that over myself. You know, in the late evening, after the sun goes down, the mosquitoes and everybody, you know, comes out for a little while. And so just kind of getting through that first hour or so after sunset is kind of nice. And I'll just take this and drape it over my head when I'm in my sleeping gear. You know, and being it's a nice olive green color, of course it also could double as some sort of camouflage netting if I needed it. You know, if you don't want to carry mosquito netting, another item that works really good is just a sniper veil. Just put it over your face. So like I said earlier, to the left is uphill and to the right is downhill. So we're actually sleeping on a slope right now. And anytime you're sleeping on a slope, which is probably 99% of the time in my experience, you want to sleep with your head uphill. Okay, if you sleep with your head downhill, your blood tends to want to rush to your head. You get headaches and stuff. So what I like to do is sleep with my head uphill. And what I've kind of gotten used to doing and developed for a technique is after I get in here and set up my gear like this, I'll take my pack, and usually it's somewhat empty. And I like having my pack under my shelter anyway, so it's not just out in the weather. And remember, I'm using that 3/4 length foam pad. I'll take my pack and I'll lay it right there at the base of that foam pad. And so there it is, just at the base of that foam pad. And I'll actually sleep just like that. Because what that does is, while the ground is sloped downhill, I'm now kind of like a hammock. I'm kind of sagged in here like this. I can just roll in and sleep like this, and it does a couple of things. For one, you know, it helps me to sleep in a more natural position. Two, it keeps me from sliding downhill in the middle of the night. That's so annoying. And, you know, if I do slide down a little, I've got something I can just put my feet against and slide myself back up with. And third, if you've been hiking all day and tramping around, it's great to be able to put your feet up. And having my pack down there gives me a nice footrest so that my feet kind of can catch a break, okay? And it also gives my feet some insulation from the ground. You know, not everything has to be, you know, a special sleeping pad or insulated mat. It can be just your gear. You can lay it between you and the ground and it'll keep you insulated as well. Okay, so next let's talk about converting this over for inclement weather. You know, let's say we can see storms coming in. We know it's going to get ugly. You know, one downfall of the lean-to, as nice as it is because it breathes well in the heat and you can get in and out of it easy, but that means you're more exposed to weather, which when it's nice, who cares? But if it's going to get crappy, I want to be able to convert this over. Now, there's other shelter designs like an A-frame, for example, that give good coverage from the weather, but they also suck for getting in and out of. Like, they're terrible, and there's not much room for your gear. So what I want to do now is I'm just going to quickly convert this over. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to take those two corners, the outside corners, I'm going to remove those toggles, I'm going to bring those corners down and stake them down, and that creates what I call a bear cave shelter. And then I'm going to take my poncho and use that to cover the front, and I'll show you how I do that. I'm just going to remove that toggle, remove that toggle. I'll set them over here. Then I'm going to grab a couple of my extra stakes. Bring this corner straight down. So I'm going to grab an extra stake, and I'm going to bring this corner straight down. Okay, so now that I've got good coverage on three sides, what I want to do is get my poncho to cover this fourth side, and it's going to serve as kind of a door. Okay, so these GI ponchos, they have grommets in each of the corners and in the centers. So what I want to do is find that center grommet on the short side. And I'm going to use this leftover prusik and poke it through that grommet. Then use a toggle to secure it. Then I'll go do the same on the other side. I just want to make sure that this poncho is fairly centered. And where the hood's at, I just lay that over the guy line. That way, if it happens to collect water and leak, it just drips over. And finally, what I can do is, because this sill nylon wants to sag a little, I can come in here with one of my trekking poles and just use that as kind of a center support to prop that up. Give myself a little room in there, a little headroom. So, you know, it's not a huge shelter, but it's big enough for me, for all my gear, and it gives me pretty much 100% protection from the weather, really utilizing gear that I'm already carrying, and I don't have to carry a tent or anything like that. So I think it's, you know, this is kind of the results of many, many classes out here, you know, compared to the techniques I was using when I started the classes. This is just evolutions from that. And so you guys are really getting the benefit of a lot of nights out here testing and trying things and learning and coming up with different systems that work. And so they work very well. I sleep very comfortably like this many nights in a row and have no issues. So I just want to thank you guys for watching, and I appreciate all your comments and questions. And feel free to check out my blog at badlandsfieldcraft.wordpress.com. Thanks again.